Hello students, I hope you are doing well, studying properly and learning all your concepts. The burning fields. This wonderful heartwarming story from Japan tells us about the giant tsunami during the massive earthquake of 1854 and the man who saved lives of hundreds of villagers living in a small coastal village of Japan. Their lives are saved by the wisdom and quick action of this extraordinary old man whose name was Hamaguchi. In a coastal village called Hiro in Japan, there once lived a prosperous farmer by the name Hamaguchi Goryo. Hamaguchi's farmhouse stood on a plateau overlooking the village and the ocean. Plateau क्या होता है? एक raised surface जिस पे Hamaguchi का घर था. Behind the plateau was the mountain covered with dense forest and in front it sloped gently down the sea. At the foot of the mountain along the shore was the little village made up 100 or more of thatched houses. There were a lot of houses that were made of thatch, मतलब कच्चा houses. One autumn afternoon, Hamaguchi was sitting on the terrace with Yon, his 10-year-old grandson. Yon ने क्या था? उसका 10-year-old grandson. He was happy. The rice crop in his field had been abundant. जो उसकी field पे rice crop थी, it was what? Abundant. He looked with pleasure at the crops stacked neatly for sale. He looked at the crops that were stacked neatly for sale. He looked down below where the villagers were hustling and bustling around were gaily decorated with ropes of straw and paper lanterns. These villagers had turned out in their best clothes in the preparation of the harvest dance. क्योंकि जब एक village में crops अच्छे से grow करती हैं तो क्या होता है? Harvest festival होता है. They were ready and preparing for the dance. Hamaguchi's eyes swept the village and the vast sea beyond. The silvery blue waves sparkling in the afternoon sun looked particularly striking. Hamaguchi sighed in contentment. Life couldn't be better. He talked about how life could not be better because everything looked so perfect, everybody was ready for the festival and the sun looked particularly striking. A little later, just as he was about to get up, Hamaguchi felt a sudden jolt. क्या हुआ? एक earthquake आया. This was followed by another shock. The house rocked 3 or 4 times and then stood still. But this did not scare him after all. Hamaguchi had experienced many earthquakes in his time. It was not his first, so he was not scared. But when he turned to look at the sea, the old man's expression changed. The water of the sea had turned into dark green color and something extraordinary was happening. The sea was moving backwards. It seemed to be running swiftly away from land. The sea did what? It started running away from the land. Even as he watched in disbelief, the tide began to change and it became what? It became violent. The villagers noticed this too. They stopped dancing and ran to the shore to watch. None of them knew what this strange phenomenon meant. But the old man on the mountain had seen one such sight as a little child, and he remembered that just before a terrible tsunami, क्या होता है? The sea suddenly and quickly rolls backward. तो क्या होता है? tsunami से पहले sea पीछे जाने लगता है, फिर एकदम से आगे आता है. He had seen the sea in such a mood and he knew what havoc it would play. The villagers had to be warned immediately of the trouble they were about to face. But there was no time to send the message to the villagers. Neither was there enough time to ring the big bells in the temple. What should he do? Then he had an idea. Let's look at the idea. He called out to his little grandson and told him to light a pine torch. Yon was puzzled with the urgency in his grandfather's voice, but he asked no questions. He kindled the torch at once and gave it to Hamaguchi. The old man ran to the fields where the hundreds of harvested rice stacks stood waiting to be taken to the market. The thought passed momentarily in his mind, and that was all his wealth. But he did not stop. What did he do? He burnt all the rice in the field. It was all his wealth, but he felt it was more important. It was not as important as the villager's life. He ran from one stack to another, applying the torch to each. The dry stalks caught fire quickly. जो dry stalks थे वो जल्दी जल्दी fire caught करने लग गए. And soon the red flames were shooting upwards. The smoke was rising in great columns and spiraling towards the sky. Yon watched in shock. Was his grandfather losing his mind? Yon was shocked कि was grandfather losing his mind. He was burning his own pile of livelihood. Grandfather, grandfather, why are you setting rice to fire? He cried loudly. Hamaguchi had no time to answer. He continued to run, setting stack after stack on fire. The wind caught the sparks and carried them further until all the stacks were on fire and the entire field was ablaze. The whole field was ekdam se on fire. The guardians of the temple saw the fire and set the big bell blooming. They set the fire alarms blooming. And the people turned from the sea to look. In Japan, everyone in the village must give help in no time to fire. So basically, जैसे ही एकदम से fire होने लगी, somebody in the temple, they started ringing the bell and everybody started moving towards the fire, because in Japan अगर कहीं पे आग लगती है तो क्या एकदम से fire को help दी जाती है. No sooner did the people see Hamaguchi's rice stack on fire than they began to run up the mountain as fast as they could. Boys and girls, young men and women, old folks, mothers with babies in their arms, everybody hurried to Hamaguchi's farm hoping to put down the fire. But when they reached the plateau, it was too late. The flames had burned down the entire rice stack. सब सारे flames जल चुके थे. This is terrible, cried the people. How did it happen? Grandfather did it, cried Yone. It was he who set fire to the rice with a torch. The people were amazed to hear this. They stared at Hamaguchi in disbelief. But why? They cried. Why did Yone set fire to his field? Look towards the sea, said the man, and you will know why I did. He said, कि एक बार sea की तरफ देखो, you'll understand why I did this. The people turned and looked. Far out they saw a great wall of water sweeping towards them more swiftly than a bird flies. It was the returning sea. The sea was coming back for a tsunami, but now they're all on top of a mountain and they were all safe. The people shrieked, but their voices were lost in great sound, deeper than thunder, as the wall of water struck the side of the mountain. एकदम से wall जो पानी की थी, it struck the side of the mountain. The hills shook and they were drenched in great bursts of foam. There was foam everywhere. When the cloud of spray had disappeared, the people saw a wild sea raving over their village. Great angry waves seethed and tumbled above the housetops. They rolled away roaring, tearing out houses and trees and great rocks and bearing them away. तो basically क्या हुआ, जो ये water था, जो सारा पानी था, it washed out the whole village. The wall of water struck again and again and continued for a long time. At last it fell back once more in its former bed. It came over here and then the tsunami fell in its normal bed. In its former bed, it came back, the sea came back to its original position. The people stood speechless on side of the mountain. The village was gone. The temple was gone. The field had been torn away. Nothing was left of their homes but a few straw roofs that floated in water. But every man and woman and children was safe on the mountain side. तो सब कुछ wash away हो गया था, but the people were alive. And then they looked at the old man. Everything he had now gone up in smoke. He stood amongst them as poor as any of them. The people realized at last why old Hamaguchi had set fire to his rice stacks, and they fell on their knees, overwhelmed by the extent of his sacrifice. तो बेसिकली क्या हुआ एंड में इतनी ज़्यादा स्मोक हो गई, एवरीबडी वॉज पुअर नाउ, दे हैड नथिंग. बट हामागुची जिसके राइस तो बच जाते एनीवेज, वो बच जाता, उसके राइस भी चाह चुके थे, एंड ही वॉज ऑल्सो एज पुअर एज अदर पीपल ओनली बिकॉज ही केयर्ड अबाउट दीज people and their sacrifice. His sacrifice was really overwhelming to the extent that people fell on their knees. Let's do the word meanings. Prosperous, rich. Stacked, piled. Contentment, happiness and satisfaction. Phenomenon, happening. Momentarily, for a short time. Drenched, soaked. Seethed, churned furiously. Bearing, carrying. Speechless, astonished. Overwhelmed, extremely moving. Objective type questions. Tick the correct answer. The hero village was in Japan. बाकी सब आप खुद करेंगे. Fill in the blanks. Hamaguchi was sitting on the roof with Yone. ये आप खुद से करोगे. Subjective type questions. Answer the following question. Where did Hamaguchi live with his grandson? Where was his farmhouse located? Describe. Hamaguchi lived in a small village called Hiro, जहाँ पे he lived by the side of a mountain on a plateau, जहाँ पे एक side shore था, एक side mountain था, and बीच में was his house, and that is where the farmhouse was located. Do these on your own. Writing skills. Describe the life story of a notebook or a pair of shoes. You need to describe the story of a shoe or a pair of notebook. Grammatical skills. Give one word for the following. One who runs away from justice or law. He is a criminal. These you will do on your own. ये भी आप खुद से करोगे. It is festival time and the family is preparing to celebrate Christmas in a big way. Read the following paragraph and fill in the blanks with passive form of words in simple present tense. The floor was mopped. Rest you will do on your own. Now we have the third question. Read the following sentences and identify whether they are commands, requests or advices. Then write them in reported speech. The class teacher said, boys, stand in a queue. What is this? This is a command. Now you need to write this in reported speech. तो आप कैसे लिखोगे? The boys were asked to stand in a queue by the class teacher. ये सारे questions भी आपको इसी तरीके से करने हैं. Do this also in the same way. Complete the following conversation with suitable determiners. President, are dash the delegates have come to the conference? Are some of the delegates have come to the conference? Similarly, you will do all of these. Activity skills. Write sentences and the meaning of the following words. Parasite. Parasite is an unwanted organism that's become part of the host. For example, dogs have a parasite called ticks in their fur. Now these you will do on your own. I hope you understood this chapter properly. Read it again and revise all the questions to understand it even better.